This is the Great Vocal Majority Podcast. Hey everybody, it's Tony Cottaspati with GreatVocalMajority.com podcast, and this is Volume 60, The Presidency and the Cult of Personality. This story doesn't begin with the American presidency. In fact, it's as old as civilization itself. For thousands of years, charismatic leaders have risen and fallen. Even in our own country, there have been charismatic leaders. But are charismatic leaders also cults of personality? Well, not necessarily. A cult of personality always accompanies a charismatic leader, but the charismatic leader doesn't always have a cult following around him. What makes the difference? Why are some charismatics without cults and others have them? The answers can be found in both the leaders and the cult followers. I don't want to put too fine a point on it, but in a general sense, the leader who is a part of a cult of personality is the central focus of that cult. Without him, there is no cult of personality. Remove him and you remove the reason for the cult in the first place. No personality, no cult. Let's do a comparison of the last two presidents, Obama and Trump. These two men have people who follow them in a fashion worthy of examination. First, let's look at Obama. Basically, Barack Obama came out of nowhere to defeat Hillary Clinton for the Democratic Party nomination for president in 2008. To say Barack Obama's legislative accomplishments were thin is to do it an injustice. It was non-existent. How then did he manage to defeat Hillary Clinton? The two weren't really worlds apart on the issues, varying only slightly and by degree. Clearly, it was Obama's public persona, which Democrats found more engaging than Clinton's, which appeared rehearsed and wooden by comparison. Obama was youthful, energetic, genial. Clinton was contemptibly familiar, bookish, and stuffy. The generational differences were glaring too. Furthermore, Obama's race appealed to the desires of Americans for an easing of racial tensions. For the political left, which is all too often obsessed with race, Obama was the cure to all of it, or so they believed. This fact alone won Obama tremendous loyalty among liberal whites, particularly prominent liberal whites in the entertainment industry. When Obama won the 2008 election against the biggest political stiff the GOP could find in John McCain, a number of Hollywood liberals announced their loyalty to Barack Obama. Not America, not the Constitution, loyalty to the president himself, loyalty to a man. Not even during the darkest days of the Second World War did Americans in Hollywood or elsewhere pledge loyalty to FDR, nor did FDR expect it. This move by actors and entertainers was the first indication that Obama was being worshipped and not simply admired. At no other time in our history have prominent Americans pledged loyalty to any person. Inasmuch as some may object to my use of the term worship, thoughtful consideration should be given to the fact that young school children were being indoctrinated by their teachers to actually sing hymns of praise to Barack Obama. This never happened before in America, but it's all too common in other parts of the world where charismatic dictators rule. It was seen in Mao's China, Kim Il-sung's North Korea, Ho Chi Minh's Vietnam, and yes, sorry to say, Hitler's Germany. The only difference is that in America, these Americans were doing it of their own volition and not being ordered to do it by the government. But it points to a rather disturbing question. Did these Americans see Obama as a president or something bigger and much more profound than a president? I think the question is fair because with all cults of personality, there is a utopian vision of the world that would be ushered in by the new leader as long as everyone can be made to follow him.
It was the most memorable time of my life. It was a touching moment because I never thought this day would ever happen. I won't have to worry about putting gas in my car. I won't have to worry about paying my mortgage. You know, if I help him, he's going to help me.
This, too, was a feature of the Obama years in office, though through all 8 years of Obama's time in the presidency, opposition was vilified and labeled as racist. Obama supporters often accused his opponents of being angry white men furious that there was a black man in the White House.
They can't say it out loud, but that's where this whole campaign is going to be. You asked about racism, it's all about racism. They cannot fathom this idea that there is a black president, and that's what they are going to fight about.
How many times did you hear that? To this very day, these things are continuously said. A great many supporters of Obama blame his failures of his presidency on jealous white men in Congress for whom racial antipathy is their sole motivation. It's how these disappointed cult-following utopians cope with loss. They are incapable of assigning blame to their cult leader, for he walks between the raindrops in the hurricane of politics. He is and must remain blameless in their eyes. And not coincidentally, the charismatic personality is not likely to accept any blame either for any of his failures.
First of all, I didn't set a red line. The world set a red line.
Therefore, I would have to conclude that there was and still remains something of a cult of personality around Barack Obama. Not really dramatic like it is in other countries. It doesn't look like anything like you see like in Stalin's Russia or Hitler's Germany. It's nothing like that. It isn't like that because in our country, our form of government tends to mitigate those effects, reducing them to a temporary and transient type of experience. But we shouldn't kid ourselves that such a thing doesn't threaten our constitutional form of government, because it does, especially when presidents like Obama shirk the constitutional guardrails on his power without consequence and with startling regularity.
Until Nancy Pelosi's speaker again, I'd like to work my way around Congress.
Next, I want to consider whether there is a cult of personality around Donald Trump. Now, unlike Obama, Donald Trump did not burst onto the national scene as a virtual unknown and win the presidency. He was a known public figure for several decades, but he was always controversial, and he parlayed his notoriety in New York City and had a successful TV show for years before actually entering politics. Trump is an unpolished, plain-talking New Yorker who feels obliged to say whatever is on his mind. In an earlier podcast, I actually referred to Donald Trump as the Howard Stern of politics. Trump is a master at selling himself. In fact, Trump puts his name on everything he does. He thinks a lot of himself, but that's not unusual when it comes to the presidency. The job requires a big ego. But Trump is such a departure from previous presidents. His presence in office is jarring to Americans and people around the world. How did he become so popular with Republican voters, you may ask? After all, for years, he was a Democrat. The answer isn't really very difficult to figure out. It's in very short order. It was frustration with the Republican Party. In 2008, the Republicans nominated John McCain over Mitt Romney. Why? Why did they do that? They did that because the country, they did that even though the country was in an economic crisis. The crisis we were in called for a business leader. Romney was such a leader. Romney made sense in 2008, but the GOP's next in line strategy meant that McCain was going to get the nomination because he was thwarted by Bush in 2000. So they nominated a sure loser, and he didn't disappoint, he lost. Perhaps Romney would have lost anyway to Obama, we'll never know. But McCain wasn't the right guy to run. He was just the next Republican in line to run. Now, fast forward to 2012, and the GOP picks Romney 4 years too late. No surprise, he was next in line. He loses, miraculously wresting defeat from the jaws of victory. How? Because the Democrat strategy had a name. It was called Kill Romney, and it succeeded. All through 2009 to 2014, the insurgent Tea Party changed the political landscape and the electoral map, and pretty much nobody noticed. The only people who didn't notice were the mainstream media, who get paid to notice. You know who did notice? Donald Trump. And he watched as Republicans took control of nearly 2/3 of all governorships and 70% of state legislative chambers around the country. And while everyone else was watching Democrats versus Republicans in Congress, astute political analysts were looking at the national political landscape and what it meant for 2016. The GOP in Congress gave only lip service to the demands of the newly energized Republican base of the Tea Party conservative. You know who also saw this? Donald Trump. Republicans gave excuse after excuse why they would not go after Obama's agenda and go to the mat against him. First it was, quote, "We control only 1/2 of Washington," unquote. Then it was, quote, "Yes, we control both House and Senate, but we need 60 votes to pass anything and Obama will veto it anyway," unquote. Voters aren't stupid. They know the GOP just didn't want to fight Obama. And maybe they didn't want to fight him because of his race. Maybe they were afraid to be called racist. It doesn't matter. None of it was good enough. So along come 17 or 18 Republicans who say they wanted to be president, but in reality, they were just volunteering to lose to Hillary Clinton because none of them were willing to fight the Democrats the way Democrats fight Republicans, except for one guy, Donald Trump. But it wasn't enough for Trump to be ruthless against his GOP opponents. He also had to appeal to the base of the GOP, which is definitely conservative. In that area, Trump had his work cut out for him because for years he identified himself as a Democrat and gave no indications whatsoever of having any governing political philosophy at all. To win conservatives over, Trump ran as an immigration hardliner. As a general proposition, the GOP is anything but hardliners on immigration. But what clinched it for Trump was his vetted list of judges he pledged to choose from if he were to make appointments to the Supreme Court. This has been the hottest of hot-button issues for GOP conservatives. The idea of Donald Trump as candidate took hold because of his ferocious stand on these two issues. Republican voters have been conditioned to expect docile candidates eager not to offend and happy to rather lose an election to a Democrat and lose the country. Donald Trump was having none of that. He was about fighting and winning, and this has won him great affection and loyalty because Trump has kept his promises. Never Trump conservatives, who first argued about his fealty to conservative principles, now have less to argue about since Trump has governed more conservatively than Ronald Reagan. But does any of this point to a cult of personality? Trump himself has caused some of this stir when he famously said he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose a single voter.
My people are so smart. And you know what else they say about my people? The polls. They say, I have the most loyal people. Did you ever see that? Where I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay? It's like incredible.
That's not the sign of a cult of personality, as much as it is a sign of a huge ego that believes that his supporters will never see him doing any wrong no matter what he does. But that really isn't true of Trump's supporters. Many people who support Trump don't support every single thing he does. There are no Hollywood stars swearing allegiance to Donald Trump. It is true that there are some Trump supporters who see him as sent by God to save America, as some sort of messiah. That's kind of true for almost any president that's ever elected. But this is not a common or prevailing view of Trump. It differs from allegiance to Obama in that Trump supporters aren't so idealistic as to be utopian. Rather, Trump's most loyal supporters simply want to see a restoration of the rule of law and constitutional order, which has eroded since in the Clinton administration years. This is, in my opinion, what disqualifies Trump supporters from being characterized as part of a cult. One last example, using Obama to demonstrate. In 2008, Obama defined marriage traditionally. By 2012, he claimed to have evolved and accepted same-sex marriage. Now, this was a sea change. You don't just go from one extreme to the other like that. But Obama did, and it made absolutely no difference to his level of support. Now imagine if President Trump took one of the keystones promises that he made and flipped it around. Let's say he appointed a liberal judge that wasn't on his list that he said he would choose from, and he provided some rationalization of doing it for doing it, he would lose support instantly because he would have betrayed one of the most critical promises he made. So, to conclude here, neither Trump supporters or Obama supporters are real, true cult followers in that sense. But there can be no doubt that Democrats are more susceptible to this sort of thing, and recent history seems to prove it, folks.
I was wondering what you would say to President Obama.
You're fired. So good.
That's it for me. I'm Tony Codispoti. Thanks for listening to the Great Vocal Majority podcast. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel, and I'll speak to you guys soon. Thanks.